The $500 fine arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped into my mailbox like a poisonous snake, and I knew immediately that my life in the Pleasant Valley Estates subdivision was about to become a living nightmare. I stood there on my driveway in Sacramento, California, staring at the official letterhead from the Pleasant Valley Estates Homeowners Association, feeling my blood pressure spike with every word I read. The letter was signed by one Patricia Donovan, HOA president, and it informed me in the most condescending language possible that my recently installed solar panel array violated Section 12.4.7 of the Community Guidelines regarding unapproved roof modifications, and that I had 72 hours to remove it or face additional daily fines of $100. My name is Robert Richardson, and I had just spent $23,000 installing those solar panels 3 weeks earlier. The installation was professional, done by a licensed company, and the panels were designed to blend seamlessly with my roof tiles. They were barely visible from the street, but apparently, Patricia Donovan had nothing better to do than patrol the neighborhood with binoculars looking for violations. I crumpled the letter in my fist and walked back into my house, where my dog Max was waiting by the door, tail wagging. He sensed my frustration immediately and pressed his head against my leg. I reached down to scratch behind his ears, trying to calm myself down before I did something stupid like march over to Patricia's house and tell her exactly what I thought of her and her ridiculous rules. My phone rang. It was my neighbor, Tom Garrison, who lived 2 houses down. "Did you get one too?" he asked without preamble. "Get what?" "A fine from the HOA. Patricia is going nuclear on everyone who made any changes to their property in the last 6 months. She hit me with a $300 fine because I planted rose bushes in my front yard that are apparently the wrong shade of pink." I let out a bitter laugh. "She got me for $500 because of my solar panels." "Jesus, Robert, that is insane. Those panels are gorgeous." "I was thinking about getting some myself." "Well, apparently they are unauthorized roof modifications. I have 3 days to remove them or I get hit with daily fines." Tom was silent for a moment. "You know what? I am done with this. I have been dealing with Patricia's power trips for 3 years now. Last year she tried to fine my wife because our Christmas lights were up until January 3rd. This woman needs to be stopped." "How do you stop an HOA president who thinks she is running a dictatorship?" "I do not know, but there has to be something we can do. Let me make some calls. My brother-in-law is a lawyer. Maybe he can help." After I hung up with Tom, I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my computer and started reading through them. The document was 78 pages of dense legalese that seemed designed to give the HOA board unlimited power over every aspect of homeowner behavior. Section 12.4.7 did indeed prohibit roof modifications without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. But there was no mention anywhere in the bylaws about what qualified as a modification versus standard maintenance or improvement. I had done my research before installing the panels. California had laws protecting homeowners' rights to install solar energy systems. The Solar Rights Act, passed back in 1978 and strengthened several times since, specifically prevented unreasonable restrictions on solar installations. But the HOA bylaws had been written in 2004, and apparently nobody had bothered to update them to reflect state law. I spent the next 2 hours diving deep into California solar rights legislation. What I found was fascinating and infuriating in equal measure. Assembly Bill 2188, passed in 2008, explicitly stated that any covenant, restriction, or condition in any deed, contract, security instrument, or other instrument affecting real property that effectively prohibited or restricted the installation of a solar energy system was void and unenforceable. There were follow-up bills that strengthened these protections even further. The HOA did not have a leg to stand on. Their rules were illegal. I drafted a response letter that night, citing chapter and verse of California law, and delivered it personally to Patricia Donovan's mailbox the next morning. I also sent copies to every member of the HOA board and requested an emergency hearing to discuss the matter. 2 days later, I received a terse email from Patricia stating that my request for a hearing was denied and that the fine would stand. Furthermore, she informed me that failure to comply with the removal order would result in the HOA placing a lien on my property. That was when I decided to lawyer up. Tom's brother-in-law, Marcus Chen, was a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. I met with him at his office in downtown Sacramento on a Friday morning. Marcus was in his early 40s, sharply dressed, and he listened to my story with the kind of focused intensity that made me feel like I was finally being taken seriously. "This is actually a pretty straightforward case," Marcus said after I finished explaining the situation. HOAs in California have been fighting and losing battles over solar installations for years. The law is crystal clear. They cannot prohibit or effectively prohibit solar panel installation. The fine is unenforceable, and any attempt to place a lien on your property would be illegal. So what do I do? First, you do not remove the panels. Second, you do not pay the fine. Third, we send the HOA a formal demand letter explaining why their actions violate state law and demanding they rescind the fine immediately. If they refuse, we file suit. Based on the case law, you would likely be entitled to attorney fees and possibly damages. "How much is this going to cost me?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "My retainer is $3,000, but honestly, I do not think this will go to court. Once the HOA gets my letter and realizes they are on the wrong side of the law, they will back down. Most HOA boards are run by volunteers who do not understand the legal landscape. They fold pretty quickly when confronted with actual legal action." I thought about it for about 10 seconds. "Let's do it." Marcus drafted the demand letter that afternoon. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, 4 pages of precisely worded arguments backed by statute citations and case law. He sent it via certified mail to Patricia Donovan and all 5 members of the HOA board. I expected a quick response. What I got was radio silence. A week went by, then 2 weeks. The daily fines kept accumulating on paper, delivered via increasingly aggressive letters from Patricia. According to her math, I now owed the HOA $3,400. She sent a letter threatening to initiate lien proceedings. Marcus filed a lawsuit in Sacramento County Superior Court seeking declaratory relief and an injunction preventing the HOA from collecting the fines or placing a lien on my property. The lawsuit also sought attorney fees and court costs. That got their attention. 3 days after the lawsuit was filed, I received a phone call from a man named Gregory Walsh, who identified himself as the attorney retained by the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA. His voice was smooth and professional, but I could hear the frustration underneath. "Mr. Richardson, I have reviewed your complaint and your attorney's demand letter. I have also reviewed the relevant statutes. It appears there may have been some confusion regarding the applicability of the Solar Rights Act to our community guidelines." "Confusion," I repeated flatly. "Your president has been threatening me with illegal fines for a month. I understand your frustration. What I would like to propose is a settlement conference where we can discuss resolving this matter without further litigation. The only resolution I am interested in is the HOA rescinding all fines, acknowledging that my solar installation is legal, and agreeing not to harass me or any other homeowner who wants to install solar panels. I will need to discuss this with my clients, but I believe we can reach an agreement along those lines. The settlement conference was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, something interesting happened in the neighborhood. Tom Garrison and I started talking to other homeowners about the HOA situation. What we discovered was that Patricia Donovan had been running Pleasant Valley Estates like her personal fiefdom for almost 6 years. She had fined dozens of homeowners for increasingly petty violations. One couple had been fined because their lawn was a quarter-inch too tall. Another family got hit with a $500 fine because their garbage cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection day. A retired veteran named Harold Peters had been fined repeatedly because his American flag was supposedly too large for the flagpole mounting brackets specified in the HOA guidelines. The more people we talked to, the angrier everyone became. There was a growing sense that Patricia had forgotten she was supposed to be serving the community, not ruling it. Harold Peters, a 67-year-old Air Force veteran with steel gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude, became particularly vocal. "I served 23 years defending this country," he told me one evening when a group of us gathered at Tom's house. "I will be damned if some busybody HOA president is going to tell me my flag is too big. This is America, for crying out loud." "The problem is that we all signed these bylaws when we bought our homes," said Jennifer Martinez, a young mother of 2 who lived on Maple Street. "We gave them this power." "But they are abusing that power," Tom countered. "There has to be some kind of check on what an HOA can do." Marcus Chen, who I had invited to the informal gathering, cleared his throat. "Actually, there might be something bigger happening here that you all should know about. Have any of you been following the state legislature lately?" We all shook our heads. "There is a bill working its way through Sacramento right now called AB 1101. It is being called the Homeowner Bill of Rights. If it passes, it would fundamentally reshape HOA law in California. Among other things, it would void any HOA rules that conflict with state law, require HOAs to provide detailed justification for fines, create an appeals process, and make it much harder for HOAs to place liens on properties. It also has provisions specifically strengthening solar rights and limiting Architectural Review Committee's power." "When would this pass?" I asked. "It cleared the Assembly in May. It is in the Senate now." "If it passes there and the governor signs it, it would go into effect January 1st of next year. That is only about 7 months away." Harold leaned forward. "Would this law affect existing HOA bylaws?" "That is the interesting part," Marcus said. "The way the bill is currently written, it would automatically void any HOA rule or bylaw that conflicts with its provisions. Essentially, it would force every HOA in California to rewrite their governing documents to comply with the new standards." A slow smile spread across Tom's face. "So Patricia's little rulebook would be worthless." "Large portions of it, yes, especially the parts that give the board unchecked power." This changed everything. What had started as my personal battle over solar panels was now part of a much larger movement to rein in out-of-control HOAs across California. The settlement conference arrived on a Wednesday morning in late June. I met Marcus at the courthouse at 8:30. The conference was scheduled in a small meeting room, mediated by a court-appointed settlement judge. Patricia Donovan arrived with Gregory Walsh and two other HOA board members. A nervous-looking man in his 50s named Stephen Clark, and a woman in her 40s named Barbara Winters. Patricia was exactly what I expected. A thin woman in her mid-50s with perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive jewelry, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. The settlement judge, a retired Superior Court judge named Harriet Lyons, was a no-nonsense woman in her 70s who got straight to the point. Let me start by saying I have reviewed the complaint and the response. Mr. Walsh, your clients are on very thin legal ground here. The Solar Rights Act is well-established law, and the case precedents strongly favor Mr. Richardson. I would encourage your clients to seriously consider settling this matter. Gregory Walsh nodded. We understand, Your Honor. We are prepared to make an offer. He slid a piece of paper across the table. Marcus and I reviewed it. The offer was simple. The HOA would rescind the fines and acknowledge that my solar installation was permitted under state law. In exchange, I would agree to dismiss the lawsuit with prejudice and release the HOA from any further claims. What about attorney fees? Marcus asked. We would each bear our own costs, Gregory said. Marcus looked at me. We had discussed this scenario. I had already spent $3,000 on his retainer, and we both knew this case could drag on for months if we pushed for fees. What about future solar installations? I asked. What happens when another homeowner wants to put up panels? Patricia spoke for the first time, her voice sharp. We will evaluate each application on a case-by-case basis. That is not acceptable, I said. You need to formally amend your bylaws to reflect state law and make it clear that solar installations are permitted. Patricia's face flushed. Our architectural review process exists for a reason. We cannot have homeowners just doing whatever they want. Judge Lyons held up a hand. Miss Donovan, let me be very clear. If this case goes to trial, you are going to lose. The law is not on your side. You would be well advised to settle this matter on Mr. Richardson's terms. Gregory whispered something to Patricia. She looked like she wanted to argue, but finally gave a curt nod. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. We will amend the bylaws to explicitly permit solar installations in compliance with state law. And you will notify all homeowners in writing of this change, I added. Another pause, then another nod. Marcus drafted the settlement agreement right there, and everyone signed it within the hour. I walked out of that courthouse feeling vindicated. I had won my battle against the HOA. But the war was far from over. When the HOA sent out the notification about the bylaw amendment regarding solar panels, it included a sternly worded message from Patricia reminding homeowners that all other architectural guidelines remain in full force and effect, and that the board would be vigilant in enforcing community standards. This did not sit well with a lot of people. At Tom's urging, we organized a neighborhood meeting for early July at the community center. We sent out flyers and posted announcements on the neighborhood Facebook group. The turnout was incredible. Nearly 100 homeowners showed up, filling every chair and spilling out into the hallway. Tom and I took turns explaining what had happened with my solar panel case and what we had learned about AB 1101. Marcus Chen gave a presentation about HOA law and homeowner rights. Harold Peters spoke passionately about the need to reform the Pleasant Valley Estates Board. The problem is not just Patricia, Harold said. The problem is a system that gives too much power to too few people with no real accountability. We need term limits on the board. We need transparent financial reporting. We need a real appeals process when someone gets fined. And we need board members who see themselves as servants of the community, not rulers of it. The room erupted in applause. Patricia Donovan was not at the meeting, but Stephen Clark and Barbara Winters were. They sat in the back, looking increasingly uncomfortable as speaker after speaker criticized the board's actions. Finally, Stephen stood up. "I just want to say that I hear your concerns. I am on the board, but I have not always agreed with every decision we have made. I think there is room for reform." Barbara nodded. "I agree. Patricia can be difficult to work with, but she is very dedicated to the community." "Being dedicated does not mean being right," Jennifer Martinez called out. "My sister's HOA in San Diego operates on consensus and transparency. Their board meetings are open to all homeowners. They publish detailed financial reports every quarter. Why can't we do the same thing here?" Tom stood up. "I propose we organize a recall election for the entire HOA board. Let's get new leadership that will actually represent the community's interests." The idea was met with enthusiastic support. Under California law and the HOA's own bylaws, homeowners could petition for a special election to recall board members with signatures from 20% of the homeowners. We had 100 people in the room. We needed signatures from about 60 households total. We got them in 3 days. Patricia was furious. She sent out an email blast to all homeowners calling the recall effort a coordinated attack by a small group of malcontents who want to turn our beautiful community into a chaotic free-for-all. She scheduled an emergency board meeting to discuss the recall petition. The meeting was held on a Thursday evening in mid-July at the community center. Under the bylaws, board meetings were open to homeowners, and the room was packed. Patricia sat at the head table flanked by the other 4 board members, looking imperious. "This meeting will come to order," she announced, banging a gavel. "The first item on the agenda is the petition for a recall election. I want to state for the record that I believe this recall effort is based on misinformation and personal vendettas." "That is not true," Tom shouted from the audience. "This is about accountability." Patricia ignored him. "Nevertheless, we have verified that the petition contains sufficient valid signatures. Under our bylaws, we are required to hold a special election within 45 days. I propose we schedule it for August 28th. "That is almost 6 weeks away," Harold objected. "The bylaws say within 45 days, not exactly 45 days. Why are you dragging this out?" "Because organizing an election takes time," Patricia snapped. "We need to prepare ballots, arrange for vote counting, notify all homeowners of the procedures." "Or you could hold it next week like a reasonable person," someone called out. Patricia banged her gavel. "The date is set for August 28th. Next item on the agenda." Over the next few weeks, the recall campaign became the sole focus of neighborhood life. Tom, Harold, Jennifer, and I formed a steering committee to recruit candidates for the new board. We wanted people who were reasonable, community-minded, and willing to actually listen to homeowners. Jennifer Martinez agreed to run for president. She was a project manager at a tech company, smart and organized, and she had a clear vision for reform. Harold Peters agreed to run for vice president. Tom would run for treasurer, and we recruited 2 other homeowners, Lisa Chang and David Foster, to round out the 5-person board. Patricia, meanwhile, doubled down on her hardline approach. She and her slate of board members sent out campaign literature warning that the radical reformers would destroy property values and turn Pleasant Valley estates into a slum. She increased patrols around the neighborhood, issuing fines for even more minor violations. One homeowner got fined because a single tree branch extended 6 inches over the property line into common area. Another got hit with a $200 fine for parking a car on the street overnight. The harassment backfired. Every new fine just made people angrier and more determined to vote Patricia out. Then, in early August, something happened that changed everything again. I was working from home on a Tuesday morning when my phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline made my heart race. California governor signs homeowner Bill of Rights into law. Major HOA reforms take effect January 1. I immediately pulled up the full article. Governor Newsom had signed AB 1101 into law the previous evening. The new law was even more comprehensive than Marcus had described. Among its key provisions, any HOA rule or restriction that conflicted with state law was automatically void. HOAs could not prohibit solar energy systems, electric vehicle charging stations, or other environmentally beneficial installations. Architectural review committees had to approve or deny applications within 45 days and provide written explanations for any denial. Homeowners had the right to appeal any fine to an independent arbitrator. HOAs were required to hold open meetings and publish detailed financial reports. Board members were subject to term limits of no more than 2 consecutive terms. Fines were capped at reasonable amounts and could not be imposed without notice and an opportunity to cure violations. HOAs could not place liens on properties except under very specific circumstances and only after exhausting other remedies. The law included provisions for homeowners to recover attorney fees if they successfully challenged illegal HOA actions. I called Marcus immediately. "Have you seen the news?" "I am reading the full text of the law right now," he said. "This is huge, Robert. This is going to fundamentally change how HOAs operate in California." "What does this mean for Pleasant Valley estates?" "It means that come January 1st, most of your HOA's bylaws are going to be unenforceable. The board is going to have to completely rewrite the governing documents to comply with the new law, and if they do not, homeowners can simply ignore any rules that violate the statute." "Can we use this before January?" Marcus paused. "The law does not take effect until January 1st. But the fact that it has been signed could be useful in your recall campaign. You can argue that Patricia's whole approach is outdated and that the community needs new leadership to navigate the transition to the new legal landscape." That is exactly what we did. We immediately updated our campaign materials to highlight AB 1101 and position our slate as the team that would bring Pleasant Valley estates into compliance with the new law while respecting homeowner rights. Patricia's response was to deny that the law would have any real impact. In a campaign email, she wrote that the new law was vague and toothless, and that experienced leadership would be essential to protect our community from government overreach. This was a spectacular miscalculation. The more Patricia tried to downplay AB 1101, the more she looked out of touch. The election was held on August 28th as scheduled. The voting took place at the community center from noon to 8 in the evening. Turnout was extraordinary. Nearly 85% of homeowners cast ballots. Tom and I stood outside the community center that evening, watching homeowners file in to vote. There was a palpable energy in the air, a sense that something important was happening. "No matter what happens tonight," Tom said, "we have already changed this place. People are engaged. They are paying attention. That is what matters." "I just want to see the look on Patricia's face when she loses," I admitted. Tom laughed. "You and everyone else in this neighborhood." The votes were counted by a professional election service that the outgoing board had hired. At 9:30, the results were announced. It was a landslide. Jennifer Martinez received 73% of the vote for president. Harold Peters got 71% for vice president, Every single member of our slate won by huge margins. Patricia Donovan received just 26% of the vote. The community center erupted in cheers. People were hugging, high-fiving, celebrating like their favorite sports team had just won a championship. And in a way, that is exactly what had happened. The community had won. Patricia left the community center quickly, her face tight and angry. She did not give a concession speech or congratulate the winners. She simply grabbed her purse and walked out into the parking lot, followed by Gregory Walsh, who looked exhausted. The new board was sworn in immediately. Jennifer's first act as president was to announce an open meeting for the following week where homeowners could share their priorities and concerns. "We work for you," Jennifer said in her brief acceptance speech. "This board is going to operate with transparency, accountability, and respect for homeowner rights. We are going to fix what is broken and build a community where people actually want to live." More cheers. I drove home that night feeling better than I had in months. The fight over my solar panels had started as a personal grievance, but it had turned into something much bigger. We had not just changed the HOA board. We had changed the culture of the entire community, but we were not done yet. The new board's first official meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in early September. The community center was packed again, this time with homeowners eager to see what the new leadership would do. Jennifer ran the meeting with impressive efficiency. The board voted to immediately rescind all pending fines that had been issued for minor or questionable violations. They established a committee to review every fine issued in the past year and provide refunds where appropriate. They voted to publish monthly financial reports on the HOA website. They established term limits of 2 consecutive terms for board members. Then they turned to the big issue, rewriting the governing documents to comply with AB 1101. "This is going to be a major undertaking," Jennifer explained. "Our current bylaws in CC and Articus are fundamentally incompatible with the new state law. We need to completely overhaul them. I propose we hire a law firm that specializes in HOA governance to help us draft new documents that are both legally compliant and fair to homeowners." Harold seconded the motion, and it passed unanimously. Over the next 3 months, the new board worked with a Sacramento law firm to draft new governing documents. They held multiple town halls where homeowners could provide input. They created subcommittees to address specific issues like architectural review, financial management, and common area maintenance. It was not always smooth. There were disagreements about how much authority the Architectural Review Committee should have. Some homeowners wanted almost no restrictions at all, while others felt that some standards were necessary to protect property values. Finding the right balance required compromise and negotiation. But Jennifer and the rest of the board managed to keep the process moving forward. By late November, they had a complete draft of new bylaws in CC and Articus that complied with AB 1101, while still maintaining reasonable community standards. The new documents were dramatically different from the old ones. The architectural review process was streamlined, with clear timelines and specific criteria for approval. Solar panels, electric vehicle chargers, and other green technology were explicitly permitted. Fines were limited to reasonable amounts and required notice and an appeals process. Board meetings were required to be open and transparent. Financial reports had to be published quarterly. The homeowners voted to adopt the new governing documents in early December by an overwhelming margin of 89%. As January 1st approached, word spread across California about what Pleasant Valley Estates had done. We started getting calls from homeowners in other communities who were facing similar issues with their HOAs. Tom set up a website where we shared our story and provided resources for other homeowners who wanted to reform their own HOA boards. The website got thousands of hits in the first week. Media outlets started picking up the story. The Sacramento Bee ran a feature article about our community titled "How One Sacramento Neighborhood Became a Model for HOA Reform." Jennifer and Harold were interviewed on a local radio show. Patricia Donovan, meanwhile, had gone silent. She no longer attended board meetings or community events. According to gossip in the neighborhood, she was considering moving to another state. On New Year's Eve, a group of us gathered at Tom's house to celebrate. It had been an extraordinary 7 months. What had started with a fine over solar panels had turned into a complete transformation of our community and contributed to a statewide movement for HOA reform. "I want to propose a toast," Tom said, raising his glass. "To Robert, whose stubborn refusal to back down started this whole thing. And to everyone here who fought to make this community better. We did something that mattered. We clinked glasses and drank. You know what the craziest part is?" Harold said. "None of this would have happened if Patricia had just been reasonable from the start. If she had approved Robert's solar panels like she should have, or even if she had backed down gracefully after the first lawyer letter, none of us would have paid attention to how the HOA was being run. She brought this on herself." "Pride goes before a fall," Jennifer said. "She was so convinced she was right and so determined to prove she was in charge that she could not see she was making things worse." I thought about that. It was true. Patricia's arrogance and inflexibility had been her downfall. If she had been willing to listen, to compromise, to treat homeowners with respect, she probably would still be HOA president. Instead, she had lost everything. As midnight approached and we prepared to ring in the new year, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. AB 1101 was now the law of the land in California. Thousands of HOAs across the state would have to reform their practices. Homeowners would have real rights and protections. It was not a perfect system. There would still be disputes and problems, but it was better, much better. The new year arrived with champagne toasts and noisemakers. Max barked at the fireworks going off across the neighborhood. I looked out Tom's window at the houses of Pleasant Valley estates, with their neatly trimmed lawns and well-maintained facades. It was a nice place to live. And now it was also a fair place to live. In early January, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from a state assembly member named Rebecca Whitmore, one of the co-authors of AB 1101. "Mr. Richardson, I wanted to reach out personally to thank you for your advocacy," she said. "Your case and the subsequent recall election in your community got a lot of attention in Sacramento. It helped build momentum for the bill and gave us real-world examples of why these reforms were necessary." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I did not do this alone. A lot of people in my community stepped up." "Absolutely. But you were the catalyst. Sometimes one person standing up for their rights can change everything. I wanted you to know that your fight mattered." After I hung up, I went outside to check on my solar panels. They gleamed in the January sun, converting photons into electricity, reducing my power bill and my carbon footprint. They were just solar panels, pieces of silicon and metal on my roof. But they had become a symbol of something larger. The principle that homeowners have rights, that power-hungry HOA boards cannot simply do whatever they want, and that regular people can fight back against petty tyranny and win. The following week, I got another call, this one from Gregory Walsh, the attorney who had represented the HOA during my lawsuit. "Mr. Richardson, this is a bit awkward, but I wanted to give you a heads up about something. Patricia Donovan is facing some legal issues." My interest was immediately piqued. What kind of legal issues? After the recall election, the new board hired a forensic accountant to review the HOA's financial records. They found some irregularities. It appears that Patricia may have been using HOA funds for personal expenses. The board has referred the matter to the Sacramento County District Attorney's office. I felt a cold shock run through me. Are you serious? Very serious. I am no longer representing the HOA, but I wanted you to know because I think you and the other homeowners deserve to understand the full scope of what was happening. What kind of personal expenses are we talking about? I cannot get into specifics because the investigation is ongoing, but it is substantial, potentially tens of thousands of dollars over several years. After I got off the phone, I immediately called Jennifer Martinez. She confirmed what Gregory had told me. We did not want to make this public until the DA finished their investigation, Jennifer said. But yes, it looks like Patricia was using HOA money to pay for all kinds of things. Expensive dinners, shopping trips, even a vacation to Hawaii that she claimed was research for landscaping ideas. That is embezzlement. That is exactly what it is. The DA is taking it very seriously. They have been interviewing board members and reviewing documents for the past few weeks. I think they are going to file charges soon. The news broke 2 weeks later. The Sacramento Bee ran a front-page story. Former HOA president charged with embezzlement and fraud. Patricia Donovan had been arrested and charged with multiple felony counts related to misappropriation of HOA funds. According to the district attorney's office, she had stolen more than $47,000 over a 5-year period. The neighborhood was stunned. Even those of us who had disliked Patricia never imagined she was a thief. We thought she was just a power-hungry control freak. We had no idea she was also stealing from us. The criminal case moved through the court system over the next several months. Patricia initially pleaded not guilty, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The HOA's financial records clearly showed unauthorized expenditures, many of which Patricia had tried to disguise as legitimate community expenses. She had used HOA credit cards to pay for personal purchases, written checks to herself for fake consulting fees, and even inflated invoices from vendors and pocketed the difference. In May, facing the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence if convicted at trial, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of grand theft and 1 count of fraud. As part of the plea agreement, she was sentenced to 2 years in county jail and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. I attended the sentencing hearing along with Jennifer, Harold, and Tom. Patricia looked diminished in her orange jail jumpsuit, her perfectly styled hair now limp and gray. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood and gave a brief statement. "I know what I did was wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I let the power go to my head. I convinced myself that I deserved extra compensation for all the work I was doing for the community. I was wrong. I am sorry." The judge was not sympathetic. "Miss Donovan, you were entrusted with your neighbor's money and you stole it. You used your position of authority to enrich yourself while acting like a petty tyrant toward the very people you were supposed to serve. You fined people for minor infractions while you were committing serious crimes. Your hypocrisy is breathtaking." Patricia was taken into custody immediately after sentencing. As the bailiff led her out of the courtroom, she did not look at any of us. She just stared straight ahead, her face blank. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing justice done, but also a kind of sadness. Patricia had brought this entirely on herself through her arrogance and greed, but it was still a tragedy to see someone throw their life away like that. You feel bad for her?" Tom asked as we walked to the parking lot. I thought about it. A little, I guess. But mostly I just feel glad we caught her before she stole even more. The forensic accountant said if we had not done the recall, she probably would have kept stealing for years, Jennifer said. The old board never questioned anything she did. That is the real lesson here, Harold added. Unchecked power always leads to abuse. Always. That is why transparency and accountability matter so much. Back at Pleasant Valley Estates, life had returned to a much healthier normal. The new board continued to operate with openness and respect for homeowners. Architectural review applications were processed fairly and quickly. Community funds were managed responsibly, and all expenditures were documented and reported. Board meetings were well attended and productive. More homeowners started installing solar panels. The neighborhood's collective carbon footprint dropped significantly. A few people even bought electric vehicles and installed home charging stations, which would have been impossible under the old regime. Property values actually increased despite Patricia's warnings that reform would destroy them. It turned out that people wanted to live in communities where they were treated fairly, and where the HOA was not a constant source of stress and conflict. Tom and I became minor celebrities in the HOA reform movement. We spoke at conferences and workshops, sharing our story and encouraging other homeowners to stand up for their rights. We consulted with dozens of other communities across California that were trying to reform their own HOAs. The website we created grew into a full-fledged resource center with templates for bylaws, guides for running recall campaigns, and a directory of HOA-friendly attorneys. We called it Homeowners United.org, and it got tens of thousands of visitors every month. In September, almost exactly a year after our recall election, I was invited to speak at a state assembly hearing on HOA reform. Additional legislation was being proposed to further strengthen AB 1101, and lawmakers wanted to hear from homeowners who had experienced the impact of the new law firsthand. I testified alongside Jennifer, Harold, and representatives from several other California communities that had undergone similar transformations. I told the story of my solar panels, the illegal fines, the lawsuit, the recall election, and eventually the discovery of Patricia's embezzlement. The thing to understand, I told the assembled legislators, is that none of this would have happened without AB 1101. That law gave us the legal foundation to challenge an abusive HOA board. It validated what we already knew, that HOAs cannot operate as little dictatorships. They have to follow the law, they have to respect homeowner rights, and when they do not, homeowners have real recourse. The committee members asked questions and took notes. Several of them mentioned that they had received hundreds of letters and emails from constituents thanking them for passing AB 1101 and sharing similar stories of HOA abuse and reform. The additional reforms passed both houses of the legislature and were signed into law by the governor in October. Among other things, the new law required HOA board members to undergo training in their fiduciary duties, made it easier to remove board members engaged in misconduct, and created a state oversight agency to handle complaints about HOAs that violated the law. California was leading the nation in HOA reform, and it felt good to have played a small part in making that happen. As the first anniversary of AB 1101 taking effect approached, the Sacramento Bee asked if they could do a follow-up story on Pleasant Valley Estates. A reporter and photographer spent a day in the neighborhood, interviewing residents and taking pictures. The resulting article, which ran on New Year's Day, was titled, "1 Year Later, how new HOA law transformed a Sacramento community. It featured photos of my solar panels, quotes from Jennifer about the new board's approach, and a sidebar about Patricia's criminal case. The article concluded, "Pleasant Valley Estates is proof that HOA reform works. When homeowners are treated fairly, when boards operate transparently, and when the law protects homeowner rights, communities thrive. What happened here should be a model for HOA governance nationwide." I saved a copy of that article. I put it in a folder with all the other documents from that extraordinary year. The initial fine from Patricia, Marcus Chen's demand letter, the settlement agreement, the recall election results, the new HOA bylaws, and the news stories about Patricia's arrest and conviction. Sometimes when I am working in my home office, I look up at those solar panels through my window and think about everything that happened because of them. They are still working perfectly, still generating clean electricity, still saving me money every month. But their real value is not measured in kilowatt hours or dollars saved. Their real value is in what they represented: a stand for principle, a refusal to accept injustice, a willingness to fight back against petty tyranny. Tom and I still get together regularly, often with Harold and Jennifer and others from the recall campaign. We have become good friends through all of this, bonded by the shared experience of fighting for our community. Last month, over beers at Tom's house, Harold raised a glass. "You know what I realized the other day? 2 years ago, I did not know most of my neighbors. I barely paid attention to the HOA. I just wrote the checks and tried to stay out of trouble. Now I know dozens of people on this street. I care about what happens here. I am engaged." That is what this whole thing really accomplished. It built community. He was right. Before the solar panel fight, Pleasant Valley Estates was just a place where people lived. Now, it was an actual community, where neighbors knew each other, looked out for each other, and worked together to solve problems. That is not a small thing. I think about that sometimes when I see news stories about HOA nightmares in other parts of the country. HOAs in Texas foreclosing on homes over trivial fines. HOAs in Florida banning American flags. HOAs in Arizona preventing homeowners from planting vegetable gardens. The abuses go on, enabled by state laws that give HOAs enormous power and homeowners very little protection. California is not perfect. We still have bad HOAs and abusive board members. But at least now we have legal tools to fight back. At least now there are real consequences for HOAs that break the law. At least now homeowners have rights that actually mean something. And it all started with solar panels on my roof and a $500 fine from a petty tyrant named Patricia Donovan who thought she could push people around with impunity. She was wrong. As I write this, it is a sunny afternoon in February. My solar panels are soaking up the California sun and spinning my electric meter backward. Max is sleeping at my feet. Outside my window, I can see Tom working in his front yard, planting new rose bushes in whatever shade of pink he damn well pleases. The HOA is not going to fine him for it. Because the HOA does not work that way anymore. The HOA works for us now, the way it always should have. Jennifer called me last week with news. She has been contacted by homeowners' rights advocates in Oregon, Washington, and Nevada who want to push for AB 1101-style reforms in their states. They want advice on how to build grassroots support and pressure legislators. "This is bigger than just California now," Jennifer said. "We started something that is spreading. People are realizing they do not have to accept HOA abuse. They can change the system." I told her I would be happy to help however I could. After everything we went through, I feel obligated to pay it forward. The story of my solar panels and Patricia's downfall has become somewhat legendary in HOA reform circles. I get emails regularly from homeowners across the country telling me their own horror stories and asking for advice. I try to respond to as many as I can. The advice I give is always the same. Document everything, know your rights, do not back down from bullies, build community support, and remember that power ultimately belongs to the homeowners, not the board. Boards work for you, not the other way around. Sometimes the fight is hard. Sometimes it takes months or years. Sometimes you need lawyers and legislation and recall elections. But it is always worth it. Because living in a community where you are treated fairly and respectfully is not just about property values or avoiding fines. It is about dignity. It is about being able to live in your own home without fear of arbitrary punishment from self-appointed authorities. Those solar panels on my roof are now more than 3 years old. They have performed flawlessly, generating thousands of kilowatt hours of clean energy and saving me thousands of dollars on electricity. They will likely continue working for decades to come. But even if they stopped working tomorrow, even if I had to replace them at great expense, I would not regret installing them for a second, because they gave me something far more valuable than free electricity. They gave me my community back. They gave my neighbors their rights back. They helped change the law for millions of Californians. And they sent Patricia Donovan to jail where she belonged. Not bad for a few pieces of silicon and aluminum on a roof. The last time I saw Patricia was actually about 6 months ago. I was getting coffee at a Starbucks in downtown Sacramento when I spotted her sitting alone at a corner table. She had been released from jail after serving 18 months of her 2-year sentence. She looked older, defeated, wearing cheap clothes instead of the expensive outfits she used to favor. Our eyes met for a moment. I saw recognition flash across her face, followed by shame. She looked away quickly and stared down at her coffee. I thought about going over to say something, but what would be the point? There was nothing left to say. She had abused her power, stolen from her neighbors, and paid the price. Her reputation was destroyed. She would never hold a position of authority again. I took my coffee and left. As I walked to my car, I felt a strange sense of closure. The story that had started with a fine over solar panels had ended with justice being served and real, lasting change being achieved. Not every story has a happy ending. But this one did. Today, Pleasant Valley Estates is thriving. Our HOA operates efficiently and fairly under Jennifer's continued leadership. She was re-elected unanimously last year. Property values have increased 15% since the recall. More importantly, homeowners actually like living here. They are not afraid of the HOA. They are not constantly looking over their shoulders wondering if they are going to get fined for some trivial violation. We have community events now. Block parties, holiday celebrations, a community garden where residents grow vegetables together. Things that never would have happened under Patricia's regime. And all across the neighborhood, on roof after roof, you can see solar panels gleaming in the California sun. At least 30 houses have installed them in the past 2 years. We are probably the greenest subdivision in Sacramento County. Every time I pull into my driveway and look up at those panels on my roof, I smile. They represent so much more than renewable energy. They represent standing up for what is right. They represent community action. They represent the principle that ordinary people can challenge unjust authority and win. That $500 fine that arrived in my mailbox on that Tuesday afternoon 3 years ago was supposed to intimidate me into compliance. Instead, it sparked a movement that changed my community, helped reform California HOA law, and sent a crooked HOA president to jail. I would say that is a pretty good return on investment for $23,000 worth of solar panels. My phone buzzes with a text from Tom. He and his wife are having a barbecue this weekend and want to know if I can come. Of course I can. These days, I never miss a chance to spend time with my neighbors and friends, because that is what they are now. Friends, not just people who happen to live on the same street. Not just fellow victims of an authoritarian HOA. Actual friends who fought together for something that mattered and won. Max barks at the window. There is a delivery truck outside, probably another package for one of my neighbors. This is a real community now, the kind of place where people look out for each other's deliveries and water each other's plants and genuinely care about their neighbors' well-being. It took a fight to get here. It took standing up to a bully. It took organizing and campaigning and legal battles. It took a new state law and a recall election and ultimately a criminal prosecution. But we got here. We built something better, and it all started with solar panels on a roof and a homeowner who refused to back down. The end.